Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. We are testing out our mics and everything, and should be going live in a couple of minutes here. Thank you for your patience and for coming today. Should be starting shortly.
Stay tuned.
Welcome to Somerville. Here we are, Somerville, Mass.
Welcome, welcome. Our host will be arriving shortly.
It will be. Fantastic.
All right, thank you. Testing, testing. Can you hear us?
Testing live from 49 Our Day Studios. DJ Crook on the beat.
Yeah, so we're just about less than 5 minutes away from getting started. Is everyone excited? Just a quick reminder that there's still time to submit questions. You can submit it through any of our social channels, LinkedIn, Instagram, or Twitter. Look forward to seeing your questions.
Like, comment, subscribe.
Yes. Don't forget to click the like button. Closer. Okay, so testing the mic a little closer. Okay.
You're going to sit there.
Just flip it, yeah. Right here, okay? How's that, okay? All right.
See, you're a pro. You're used to like media and all the attention.
No, I'm not. No. Normally, I try to help other people get attention. Not me. But.
Great. Well, first, thank you, Jared, for taking the time to spend with us and to visit us here at our offices here in glorious Davis Square, Somerville, Massachusetts.
Well, thank you for having me.
First, I want to just sort of say, you have an incredible background. 8 years. You've done lots of things, but one is 8 years as the White House Senior Correspondent for the Wall Street Journal.
Yep.
I got to confess that I'm a bit of a West Wing fanboy.
Okay.
And I want to start out with sort of a personal question. Do you have any sort of wonderful moments or memories or, something funny or amusing from your time at either asking questions in the briefing room or, special moments from White House?
A couple. That's going back in time. A couple things come to mind. I won't do too many anecdotes. One is I remember Susan Rice. I asked her a tough question.
Yeah.
And she gave me a look that made me feel, I'm 6'3", it made me feel about 3'2". And I didn't ask any more questions that day. I don't remember what the question was. I just remember the feeling at the time. Getting to work at the White House is amazing. I think the moment that I started just before the BP oil spill, which was April 20th, 2010, that was the most, I guess, like both thrilling and hardest kind of professional time I had, because it was just 6 in the morning till 11 at night writing stories all the time, like just all day long writing. And it was, if you remember at the time, there was like, oh, how many barrels of oil are coming out of the well cap? And it was like hourly updates, and I had to write a whole story every time, and it was just wild. But you know, getting to go into the Oval Office, getting to see Marine One land on the back lawn, and how they're able to land this massive helicopter on these 3 little pads every single time is really, it's a kind of, you know, an experience that you can't buy. So it's really amazing for that. Not to mention how much I learned about policy and writing and people and all that through that experience. So
Oh, terrific. Well, I can only imagine. I'm sure there's like there's a whole other session we could have just on White House.
Oh yeah.
And speaking of White House, you know, well, you've been doing a lot in this space for a little while. The White House in September 2022 came out with a first framework around digital currencies and digital assets. Any observations about, you know, that and its impact on policy for blockchain?
Yeah, it's interesting. It feels like the last, I think the way I've looked at policy in the space is it really kind of starts with Facebook and Libra. I think that kind of woke the world up, not just the US, but the world globally, to the idea of what's possible with digital assets. And obviously I come from this at Circle, which has a stable coin, which is much like what Facebook was trying to do with Libra. But I think the Biden administration deserves a lot of credit, as does Congress, of members of both parties, of like really the last 2 years in particular, there's just been like a level of education has just gone up dramatically. There was the President's Working Group report on financial markets from the U.S. Treasury Department, November of 2021, that laid out a really clear set of recommendations for what they wanted out of Congress. And Congress has like taken very concerted efforts, had a lot of hearings. Obviously, the industry that I'm part of has not always acted in the most appropriate way. Some own goals, I guess we'll call it, is the nicest way to say it. But I do think the framework that the administration, the fact that we've got a whole of government approach to digital assets is a really positive thing. Now, if you look globally, other jurisdictions, the EU, UK, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, other countries are like marching really kind of ahead of the US in terms of actually enshrining policy into law. We've got some catching up to do there. But even if the US isn't first, once we set the rules, I think they'll be the rules of the road for the global economy.
Yeah. So let me tie 2 things together there. I heard you say, so it is true that this is a global, you know, phenomenon. We're seeing a lot of activity around the world. The US has made some steps in this area. But you know, how much of the domestic policy or what the Biden administration and others are trying to do is really about catching up and making sure, you know, U.S. dominance in technology or in innovation or in jobs creation is maintained? How much of this is is there a long-term plan which is, hey, this is actually strategically important as a nation?
It's hard to answer that question. I say that because at different moments when you see some of the reports like the ones you mentioned with the White House, all the reports that came out of the executive order from a year and a half ago, it feels as though this is a priority for the government. And yet it still is taking a long time to get policy enshrined in law. But if you look at, you know, when you think of, we were chatting just before this about cryptography, like if you look at the expertise that's required in cryptography, like you want the best and the brightest people doing that. And you want like Western values, in my opinion, being someone from the US, like you want Western values, you know, being the things that are like driving the next iteration of the internet. And I do think members of Congress, I do think the administration understands that. Now, blockchain obviously is happening at a moment of extreme change for the world. And then you've got things like AI that come over top and start generating a different level of attention. But I do think there is an understanding that these are really good paying jobs, really smart people who are not myself, not talking about myself, you're not a cryptographer, but who are really driving technological change. Even like Circle, we have 1,000 employees across 37 different states. Like that matters to every individual employee, and matters to the GDP of the country, and in our own little way.
How did you? Can I take a step back a little bit around that? How did you come to you held one might consider the pinnacle of journalistic roles, right? As being the senior White House correspondent. How did you come to?
Very serendipitously. So coincidentally, President Obama's deputy White House spokeswoman was a woman named Jamie Smith. I had left the White House. She had left the White House, and we actually, almost like a movie, physically ran into each other in front of the White House in Lafayette Park.
If I had a nickel for every time I ran into some White House administrator.
It just happened. She's like, "How are you doing?" I said, "Good." And really, it's family reasons. Like I have twins. My wife was pregnant with twins at the time. She has a sister who has twins and lives in this area. And we're like, oh, we want our kids to grow up near each other. And so I saw President Obama's deputy White House spokeswoman, and I said, oh, I'm looking. She's like, how are you doing? I said, I'm looking for a job in Boston. She's like, how do you feel about crypto? And I said, I don't really have a lot of thoughts. This is back in middle 2017. I was like, I don't really have a lot of thoughts about it. I've been so focused on other policy areas. She's like, you're not against it, right? No. And then she knew the CEO of Circle, Jeremy Lair, and said, talk to this guy, and had a conversation, and it worked out. And, I started in September 2018, which is when we launched USDC. And so it was really fortuitous time to be there to see the launch of essentially the first kind of true digital dollar, in my opinion, and watch that growth, over the last 5 years has been really an amazing thing to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, so given that history, right, you've been involved for, as in the front lines, right, as it were, for 5 years now. And how many countries is Circle in?
Over 100. Well, USDC is available in over 190 countries. We're in probably a dozen countries in terms of employee base, give or take.
And so with that, what kinds of trends are you seeing sort of globally around this in terms of not just for USDC, but blockchain adoption writ large, right?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, myself included, come at this sometimes from too narrow of a view, like a US view. We have generally decent, obviously we have a very good financial system, decent payment systems, although there are, if you have Venmo and I have PayPal, even though Venmo owns PayPal, we can't split a check unless you download Venmo or I download PayPal. There's some walled gardens.
Takes 3 days to clear a check.
Takes 3 days. It's like all those things. But and we think in this country, of course, about our own inflation in the last few years. But look at countries like Argentina that are facing triple-digit inflation. And I bring those cases up to say there is like unending demand for dollars, like just unbelievable. When you talk to people from Latin America, people in countries in Africa, they just like yearn for dollars. And USDC is starting to meet that need. So even though overall the circulation of USDC has gone down as the market has gone down, which it's supposed to be not an asset that appreciates or depreciates in price, but the circulation can change. Even amid all that, in places like Latin America, you're starting to see USDC adoption continue to go up because of concerns about inflation, and they want a stable medium of exchange, which is the US dollar, and also therefore is USDC, because it imports all of the monetary and other values of the dollar.
Do you see differences by region, Latin America? I mean, it's terrible to put a broad brush on Latin America versus
of course
Africa
it is.
Asia, but like, do you see broad
yeah, we do. And again, to speak in kind of broad brushes, you see like, really big spike in demand across Latin America. APAC, obviously USDC plays a large role in APAC, but there are some other competitors that have kind of first mover advantage, namely Tether, that has a little bit of first mover advantage there. And then across Africa, obviously there's just so much innovation given like the youth of their population overall. There's a lot of payments innovation happening across different countries in Africa, India as well. And so there is diversity in terms of how USDC is or is not being used and what the use cases are across different countries. And I say, to your question, it's making me think about, I think for myself included, when first got into this industry, like the main use case for payment stablecoins for USDC was to buy and sell digital assets. Our banks are only open 9 to 5 and closed on weekends, but digital asset markets are 24/7, doesn't matter what's going on. So if you need liquidity, how are you going to do that if your bank is closed and Bitcoin is going up or down in price and you want to buy it? That's the need that USDC met. Really, the last year and a half, we've started to see kind of a move toward more traditional payments, using USDC to kind of buy and sell common goods. It's not at the point where like people are buying it at scale for coffee, but it's going to get there. Like we have partnerships with MoneyGram, with MasterCard, with Visa, with Checkout.com. and a range of other companies that are starting to integrate USDC into traditional payments so that you and I or people anywhere in the world can use USDC or a digital dollar to go and buy a thing that isn't a digital asset.
Yeah. Do you think that, there are lessons there that apply more broadly to blockchain in general? So technologies have always played a role in, more recently, you can say Arab Spring started because of Twitter, right?
Yep.
Or, Ukraine is fighting Russia with drones, $2,000 drones, not, $1 million drones.
Yeah.
Do you think blockchain in general plays a role in these, more internationally?
I do. I think so. Like, when you think about the values of blockchain, whether it's for financial transactions or for non-financial transactions, they have extremely low barriers to entry. For us, we think of it like a real-time gross settlement layer, but even if you're not doing financial transactions, anybody with a digital wallet, any digital wallet can connect to a blockchain and do transactions. Well, that same thing can hold where, like, you learn about, there are groups in Ukraine that are using it to document war crimes and using Filecoin and others to like upload images, so to speak, onto blockchain to make sure that those are tamper-proof forever and live forever. And then that way The Hague and others can go and research and document, what they see as war crimes. So, that low barrier to entry, I think, is going to enable a lot of kind of just change throughout the world. And we're seeing, and I keep going back to Ukraine just because it's so front and center, but that's an area where you're seeing blockchain be used, yes, for financial transactions. If you remember, it feels like decades ago, but when Russia first invaded Ukraine, one of the first things the Minister of Digital Transformation did, because they needed money to buy military equipment, protective military equipment, is threw up an Ethereum address and said, send us money. And in a couple of months, like $100 or so million worth of digital assets was sent to that. They were able to buy flak vests and helmets and all those things. Now, obviously, the amount of traditional money that has gone to Ukraine is, magnitudes higher. But if blockchain can work in a war zone and the speed and ability to move value really quickly, just think about what that means from a broader societal perspective. So, yeah.
Well, you raise a good point there. So there's both there's a governmental point, right, which is I, as a government, can stand up and can make, ask for money, right? I have a platform to do so. There are a lot of people who are underrepresented, right, and don't have that platform. Are there humanitarian, cases or, where this also plays a role, or blockchain has an enabler?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so I'll use two examples. During COVID-19, there were a lot of doctors and medical professionals in Venezuela who wanted to get money to buy medical equipment so they could treat people with COVID and protect themselves. The Maduro government wouldn't allow them to. And so Circle and a couple of other entities partnered with the US government and were able to send USDC to those doctors over a blockchain, which again is tamper resistant. And therefore, the Maduro government couldn't shut it down. They could shut a bank down, but they couldn't shut an individual blockchain down. And those folks were able to get USDC, somehow convert it to local currency, and buy the medical equipment that they needed. And we're seeing that again. To go back to Ukraine, we've partnered with UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and the Stellar Network, and beaming essentially USDC to folks on the ground in Ukraine who need money, and they can cash out at MoneyGram, which there are, I think, about 1,000 or 2,000 MoneyGram locations in Ukraine, where they can convert to their local currency or whatever currency they want. So, yeah, great question.
Have you? Some of this comes from, we had met at the Harvard Belfort Center, which conversation around blockchain and broader public policy implications. And there, we met a Syrian refugee who talked about the fact that I think the number is over 80% of money that is donated to Syria, or to name your particular refugee status, actually goes to somebody else, right? Does not actually end up in the middleman, and often not good people.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Do you think there's an opportunity for blockchain to help solve some of that? Or?
Absolutely. And I think, both of our phones are off screen right now, but when you think about device-centric payments, if I can send you money, regardless of where you are in the world, or send you value wherever you are in the world, there really doesn't have to be any intermediaries. And that's not to say intermediaries aren't important. They are in certain instances. But the traditional way to deliver aid, particularly in the middle of war zone or strife, sometimes amounts to literally flying a plane and dropping a pallet of cash. And we joke, and it's
never near me.
Yeah, never near me. Yeah, don't want to be around it. You want to be kind of, never near us, but right. If only, right? But we joke is like now, and it's kind of not funny, but like if you tried to create an innovation called cash today, it would not get approved because it's completely untraceable. Right. But to your really initial question, like the ability to move value seamlessly from a distance is very meaningful from the delivery of aid perspective, because handing cash over to people is just, it's not safe, because not only is it not safe in terms of you don't know if it got to them, let's just say it gets to them. Do you really want somebody in the middle of a war zone to be carrying piles of cash? Like how much does that put them at risk? Yeah. Whereas if they have a phone, generally someone doesn't know if that phone has money on it, or if they lose their phone, it doesn't matter. It's called a brain wallet. If you can remember your seed phrase, you can go anywhere in the world and get another device, put your seed phrase in, and therefore you've got your money again. So there's a lot of applications. That's why with our work with UNHCR and other agencies to deliver aid, they're seeing, like, again, it's all like test cases right now, but they're seeing a lot of value in being able to deliver that aid almost direct to consumer, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah, it's funny to think about. I mean, the words we use today, like wireless, because when was the last time we used a wired phone?
Right.
But we think about in terms of what used to happen, and you're saying today cash would not get approved. If someone came to you and said, "Yeah, okay, so I have this idea. I'm going to take bark off trees and I'm going to run it through a big printing press, and we're going to everybody pretend that it has some value." Of course, it'd be crazy, right? No one would accept that as a.
And you look at the pandemic, like cash became a vector for transmitting COVID-19, right? And so the adoption of digital payments was accelerated because of COVID-19 for some of these very reasons, where it's like, if I hand you cash, then you now have all my germs. Unfortunately, we haven't transacted in any cash recently that I'm aware of. But
no one was paid to be on either side of this.
All three.
So I think one of the things I take away is on the domestic policy side, right? There's an opportunity for there's a lot that's happening, right? So the White House framework we talked about, there's an opportunity for the U.S. to kind of take a leadership role here. Is there the SEC has been very active, right, in the last few months. Do you see blockchain playing a role the other way in influencing policy, not just the U.S. having a policy about blockchain, but blockchain influencing domestic policy as well?
Yeah, I do think so. And I think the way where it's having the most influence is probably as it relates to like central bank digital currencies. So for those who don't know, there are 105 countries comprising 95% of the world's GDP that are kind of in some stage of developing a central bank digital currency. And China obviously is farthest along with their digital ECNY project in the hands of like 250 million citizens. And I think that, again, this goes back to Facebook and Libra. I think that woke the world up to the idea of what truly digital dollars could look like, or truly digital money. And other countries like China and others have run with it. And so I think, from a U.S. perspective, the Federal Reserve, not too far from here, and the Boston Fed has been, leading Project Hamilton, it was called, which was a really extensive effort to think about blockchain technology or digital ledger technology, to think about how can that be used to enable better, fast, cheaper, more programmable payments. And I think, countries globally, central banks globally are really kind of grappling with that. And then I think, Colin, to maybe turn it to you, thinking about your work, I talk so much about things from a transaction and financial perspective, but, with your work with the DOE and other agencies, I mean, how do you see blockchain impacting the way they do their work?
Yeah. Okay. First, I've never been interviewed by a Wall Street Journal.
No hard questions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What was the Susan? What look did Susan give you?
It just made me feel about that big. Yeah.
Well, we have a lot. We have a lot to say on that topic. I think from our perspective, energy influences basically everything that happens, right, in the world. So inflation today is driven by, a supply constraint around natural gas because of Russia and other, our transition to a greener economy. Inflation drives food prices, transportation, everything is impacted in that sense.
Yeah.
And so that's at a micro level. And then clearly we see, foreign policy influenced by energy as well, right? So the more that countries can be self-sufficient, and from an energy independent, I think there's a great opportunity there. We see that, I think you can go back a long way in history to find examples of commodities and natural resources sparking conflict at a local level and international level. I don't think you need a degree to kind of make that case. And we think the more that energy is local and decentralized, then there's an opportunity. Then the safer, cleaner, more equitable communities can emerge. We think that in order to do that and manage those grids, you need some kind of verification, integration of data across the different distributed resources. And there's an opportunity for us to play a role in it, helping to verify that energy is where it says it is. It's producing what it's supposed to do. The carbon is what people imagine it, claim it to be. And we think that can lead to a better world.
It's interesting. We talk about what we do all the time. I think from the outside, we look like, we create digital dollars and that's our business. And yes, it is. But we think so much of what we do is infrastructure. Is creating like infrastructure for the future, what we say is the future of finance. And I think for your work, a little bit of like helping, whether you're using your own blockchain or integrating with permissioned or permissionless blockchains, is like kind of making that infrastructure work as seamlessly as possible, because so much of our lives are digitized, and as digitized as they are today, they're going to be more so in the future in a lot of ways. And how do we make that experience seamless? Like, you need infrastructure to be able to do that. And I think the blockchain is not the only solution, but it's one of the ones I think that's going to really help make that transition a little bit easier.
I think we'd agree with that. I think especially where privacy, anonymity, right? We take for granted sometimes. We live in relatively safe neighborhoods. A lot of it, if you're streaming, right? Generally, and I think that we take for granted that people's identities can be used for against them. You kind of talked about walking around with piles of cash. That makes it, but intimidation, threats, those things exist in other parts of the world, and actually here at home in certain neighborhoods too. And the more that we can have anonymous, private transactions, there's some benefits to that. Of course, there's a downside to that too. And thinking a little bit about coming back to sort of the foreign policy piece, you mentioned China. How much of sanctions around Russia or China and its digital currency, how much is that influencing U.S. foreign policy or U.S. policy around blockchain?
Yeah, I think a couple ways to answer that. I think a lot. I mean, in the sense that I rattled off a data point. The digital ECNY is in the hands of 200+ million citizens. There's stories that during COVID, when folks had stepped outside, they were supposed to be in lockdown. They literally stepped outside into their porch, not into their porch.
Yeah, because that'd be awkward.
That'd be awkward. Yeah, but they just shut their money off, right? So from us. From a U.S. perspective, as we kind of grapple with the idea of a central bank digital currency, which the Federal Reserve has said will likely be, if anything, wholesale, which means it'll be between banks and the Fed, not between consumers. The privacy is like a really big concern. So I think there's an active debate. I think there are those who look at what China is doing and say, "Oh my God, we're behind. Therefore, we need to have a central bank digital currency." And our argument is like, let's not try to out China. Let's do what the U.S. does well, which is like rigorous public sector oversight with responsible private sector innovation. Like, that's the winning recipe for the U.S., and that's what we want to see continue happening.
I think it's super interesting because there are at least sort of two models, right, that you can imagine if we take the internet and biotech around as examples here. The U.S. arguably has some of the top internet companies, right? So you can point to Google, Alphabet, Meta. They've all changed names, right? I know. Alphabet, Meta, and you also have some of the largest biotech companies and pharma companies in the world. The internet has largely been left unregulated, and that it's a which has led to the emergence of giant companies.
Yep.
Pharma is highly regulated.
Yep.
And do you think blockchain will go one direction or the other? How do you think it?
Yeah, I think it's got to be a mix of both. And I think for us, like, my CEO, actually, this is the 10th anniversary of Circle, but also the 10th anniversary of the first hearing ever on digital currency.
Yeah.
Actually was in the Senate Homeland Security Subcommittee. And we've been saying the same thing, which is like, you need some rules of the road, particularly like money to us, and not just to us, not because we think it, but because it is like money is rules based. So I think particularly as it relates to money, there is going to be. But I think, taking the approach of the way we regulate the internet at first in terms of letting the free market to some degree have reign, and then on a kind of intermediary basis is like trying to put rules in place to make sure the intermediaries that are engaging with the blockchain. I think putting regulations on them is really smart. And you've got coming up in the next couple of weeks a vote on a stablecoin bill in the House, and as well as like a broader market structure bill. You have MiCA going into effect in Europe, which is I can't remember how many pages, I think 175 page digital asset comprehensive regulation to think about how to regulate this industry. So I think regulation is coming. I think the industry has had a decade plus to kind of get its footing. And I think that, whether it was FTX or Terra Luna, which was an algorithmic so-called stablecoin that wiped out $40 billion in 3 days, I think like we need regulation to some degree, but it doesn't have to be overly broad. It can be done in a way that like balances the harms and benefits in a way that like we'll all get the benefit from the technology.
Yeah, I can see that. I think both sides. As you say, I think in a place where people's lives and livelihoods are at stake, the more that there's importance, of oversight. We're coming up on an election year, right? And we're practically in election season now.
Don't ask me for any predictions.
No, I don't have I've to ask one prediction just around where do we think the legislation, or do you think we'll see any changes, either as part of rhetoric, right? That's often what elections are about, but or we'll see any other major changes heading in, or sometimes it can also be like a stagnant time, right? I think that's kind of
in terms of regulation of the digital asset industry. I think you're already starting to see. You've seen candidates kind of talk already about their concerns around a central bank digital currency. You've seen before the presidential election a lot of folks running for Congress and senators who are advocating for better kind of crypto policy. And I think when you look at the way that Congress, it's easier to look at Congress, the way that if you look at how they approach digital assets, it's not as much Republican and Democrat as it might seem. It's really generational. And frankly, like those who are a little bit younger kind of get it. And those who are a little bit older kind of just scoff at it. And so I think as you have younger candidates, you're going to see a little bit more of a kind of positive conversation around digital assets generally. I think specifically we are going to see in the next 2 years regulation in the United States around digital assets, potentially even this year as well around payment stablecoins. I just think, when the Treasury Department, when the President's Working Group comes out with a report as they did 2 years ago, which in that entity includes SEC, CFTC, all like the main 3 and 4 letter financial agencies come together and say, Congress, do something. Congress is kind of taking up that mantle and seems to be very close with bipartisan legislation.
It's there for a long time, hard to get Congress to do lots of things. And now so it's hard to imagine this is the issue people are gelling on.
It is. It's really surprising. We joke internally. I have a young colleague who's like, why do we get so much attention? It's like, why does this industry get so much attention? It's like, well, because sometimes because we do a lot wrong, but also when you're dealing with people's money, like people just kind of get excited and animated about that. And I have like high praise for having had probably 100+ conversations with staffers in the last like 12 months. The level of questions I'm getting, they're getting harder. Like I have to be very sophisticated, more so than we did early on in terms of our answers. Like there are now people with very deep expertise, and that's a great thing, and that's going to help us as an industry and also make sure we get the best public policy.
I think that makes sense. I think the more sophisticated the question, answers are only as good as the questions that
Yep.
are asked. The more
Yep, very
sophisticated the questions, the better the answers are, and the more that you're getting to real substance. So
Yep.
that makes sense.
Yep.
So with that, maybe I might ask if there are questions from our group who
Sure.
might have more sophisticated questions than I do, or better
Yeah.
questions, around the topic. If there's anything from our esteemed colleagues here but you can't see on film, but that's it. Anya, I'll repeat the question for you.
My question is, what are some of the biggest challenges facing blockchain technology, both foreign and domestic? And second part of the question is, how can they be addressed?
That's really, really good question. I think.
Should I just restate just
Oh
for the
yeah,
mic?
please. Yeah, good.
Just
That'll give me time to come up with an answer. Too. Yeah.
Exactly. We'll play some Jeopardy music at the same time.
Dude.
So Anya's question is, some of the biggest challenge foreign domestically, and also like what solutions are there?
Yeah, I think to me still the biggest challenge is like demonstrating the use cases. Like most people, again, I come at this from a financial standpoint. Like most of us don't know how the plumbing of the financial system works, and there's this old adage that's like, we don't know, you don't care about your plumbing until it's broken. Yeah. Same thing about the financial system. And what we're trying to do in some way is upgrade the financial system. So you have to kind of like start. It's just so hard to kind of get to that level of depth and expertise to explain it. But I think the use cases are where we need to just continue to put proof in the pudding, and not as an industry talk about the things that might be possible, but actually just show the things that are possible. So I think that's, to me, still the biggest challenge, as well as like the solution is there, which is like demonstrate the value of the technology.
Yeah, I think it was John Oliver who had that funny saying, like, blockchain is everything you don't understand about finance combined with everything you don't understand about technology.
Yeah,
combined.
just like mashed together. Yeah, it's
that intersection.
It is. It's a really, and also it's frustrating to say, but it is changing all the time. And I think that as a company, we're really trying to avoid the shiny object syndrome that I think a lot of the industry has, and constantly chasing the new thing. Whereas for us, we're like, we know that what we're trying to do is make payments cheaper, better, faster, more programmable. Like that's what we're trying to do. That's our laser focus. And I think, we can't speak and solve all the challenges of the industry, but we can speak and solve the ones that we know we have a hand in trying to solve.
Yeah, no, it's terrific. I kind of see it's the OXO grips kind of, example where if you can, originally they made these potato peelers that were for arthritic people. And then it's like, turns out if you solve it for that, you solve it for everybody, right? They figured out a real use case, which said that, there's a better way to make a potato peeler.
Man, I'm like, why do I know OXO grips? Now I'm like seeing the random drawer that I never opened.
Exactly.
And it's like a nice thick
you've got
black
5 of them in
handle.
your drawer. Exactly. And
Yeah.
the blockchain analogy, I think, is, as you're saying, if you can help people with that are refugees get 100%, 98% of their funds instead of 20% or 10%, then everybody starts to ask, why do I pay $30 to wire money? Why do I wait $3, 3 days for my check to clear? Right? If you start to ask these questions, which you start seeing.
And we always say like it's not enough that for us it's like it's really cool that I can send money anywhere in the world very quickly with USDC, but it's not enough that it's a cool thing. It has to actually have like inherent value in terms of the settlement time, the speed, the programmability, the traceability, all that, and it does. But we can't just focus and talk about the fact that blockchain enables cool things. Like it's not that they're like I have Apple Pay, that works too. So what's the real like value of using USDC and other technologies? So we have to get a level deeper in terms of the way we talk about the value.
Terrific. Other questions? Ooh, Becky has a question.
I guess you talked a little bit about the US, towards coming out with the rest of the world. You could snap your fingers and have the government make one policy change, get on board one thing. What would it be?
Yeah, you want to restate that?
So
I know my answer already. But
got it. Good.
But
Becky's question is, if there was one thing you could snap your fingers and make a U.S. government policy change, what would it be?
Really, it's past payment stablecoin legislation. And I say that obviously coming from where I come, extremely biased, but if you think of the entire digital asset economy right now today is about $1 trillion. At one point, it was as high as $3 trillion. 99+% of the stablecoins in circulation are dollar referenced. If you turn on CNBC any day and look at the price of Bitcoin or Ethereum or any other asset, it's always quoted in US dollars. Therefore, to me, the underpinning of the entire digital asset ecosystem is the dollar, and therefore digital dollars. If we can get regulation right to make sure that every single payment stablecoin is operating on a level playing field, and the consumer, whether they're like people like you and I, or a sophisticated investor, or a small business, or a large enterprise, knows that the stablecoin they're buying is actually stable and backed by the right reserves. If you get that right, you're basically injecting stability into the ecosystem in a way that I think is going to allow the innovation of blockchain to really take off, whether it's for financial reasons or not, because tokenomics and transactions are only one part of what blockchain can be used for, as your company knows, and your company knows so well. But getting that stability is essential, and payment stablecoin legislation in the US is the way to do it, because so much of the innovation is happening here. Like, it's great that Europe and UK and Japan and Singapore and Hong Kong and all these other jurisdictions are moving forward, but the dollar is the world's reserve currency, and we've got to get the digital dollar right. And I think we're really close on that.
Do you think there is, to broach the subject, right, which is the dollar is the world's reserve currency, is there some fear in policymakers' eyes around, hey, this might not be the case in the future it's at risk with the emergence of these other countries and other cyber currencies?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. I think that early on in the days of digital assets, Bitcoin in particular, there was concern, oh my God, that first hearing I referenced 10 years ago in the Senate Homeland Security Subcommittee was really about the idea of, like, is Bitcoin going to replace a dollar? Has not happened, is not going to happen in my opinion. But I think the rise of China's ECNY, the fact that many other countries are considering their own central bank digital currencies, just the fact that there's broader global national security and foreign policy competition, like the dollar is not as strong as it once was. And I think we have to compete. The dollar is strong for a variety of reasons. Among them is the fact that we have good laws in place, and among other things. But we have to be able to compete on technology. And I think we make the argument, and it is true, that we are advancing the cause of the US dollar. There are, today about $30 billion worth of USDC in circulation, one-to-one. At some point in the future, like, that could be trillions. Like, we look at our total addressable market as a company as like, I think it's M2, which is cash. There's $2.3 trillion worth of cash in circulation. We see USDC, and that is a full replacement for cash. Cash isn't going away. People still stuff it under their mattresses or wherever people put it, but USDC is going to help bring more of that cash into digital form, and advance the dollar to this next generation of the internet as we think of Web3.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Question submission from socials.
Oh.
So this came from Instagram from Theo_GG75.
Theo_GG75. I love it.
How do you see the evolution of digital currencies in the next few years?
How do you see the evolution of digital currencies in the next few years?
It's a really good question. I think a couple different ways. There's a lot of blockchains out there.
Yeah.
And I just like, I don't know, I'm trying to think back in history, what are the good examples of websites that are no longer around from the .com?
Oh my gosh, I remember.
Come on, somebody's got to throw it.
Pets.com. Okay,
I was going to say pets.com, but I was like, how could that die? Everybody has dogs. That's crazy. Or cats. I don't know if you're cat people. Sorry. I think there's going to be blockchains that don't win and that fail. I think that's going to be the case. I think that you've seen just in the last week, you've seen BlackRock, Charles Schwab, Fidelity, Citadel, NASDAQ. A bunch of these, I don't think we can understate or overstate. These are some of the most massively powerful companies on earth. take concerted efforts to get into digital asset space. Like that's wild. And so I think as you get this kind of marriage of TradFi or traditional finance and blockchain technology, not to mention all the national security work that is going on integrating blockchain technology, I just think we just can't see the innovation. It's like, it'd be foolish for me and anybody to really predict what's going to happen. You know, we think, for example, streaming payments is going to be an example. We were talking before, if you take an Uber or Lyft, that driver, you know, he or she, you know, might get paid at the end of their shift. They probably have to pay a pretty high fee to get paid at the end of their shift. Well, what if they could get paid at the end of every single ride right away? Right now, that's too hard because the way payments work today, it's really costly. But with blockchain technology and digital dollars or other, you know, forms, whether it's digital euro or whatever it is, like I don't have $1 million, but I could send $1 million for like fractions of a penny right now over blockchain. Cannot do that in the traditional finance system. So that's a way of saying, I don't know what's going to come, but as we get stability into the system, we're going to see innovations that we're like, wow, I never even thought of that, like at all, you know?
Yeah, it's one of those funny things. If you are, you know, I remember when the iPhone launched, right? The first smartphones, and could anyone have predicted that, you know, an app with birds hitting pigs, you know, colorful with colorful language, that would be a multi-billion-dollar business, and you know, or candy falling from the sky.
Well, now you're making me think of my White House days. Also, the other very hard tradition while covering the White House was moving from BlackBerry to iPhone.
Really?
Because during the White House press briefings, if you look at the reporters, they're all writing stories while they're shouting questions, and while the press secretary or the president, whomever it might be, is responding, they're all writing. And to transition from the beautiful keys of a BlackBerry to the screen of an iPhone, it took me a while to get back up to speed, you know. Talk about transition.
The only ones, you know, impacted negatively by that transition.
I was like, bring back the BlackBerry. Bring back the
reporters.
BlackBerry. That's right.
Terrific. Any other last Kim, Kate? Oh my God, you in front. The person, the lady.
You had mentioned you try to stay away from the shiny objects, but we've talked a lot about innovation, and I'm just curious: is there something that you personally are really excited about? Any gems, either locally or in other regions?
That's really great.
Question is, any gems or specific interesting technologies you've seen locally or abroad that you're like personally excited by?
Yeah, I mean, artificial intelligence in general, like I just find that fascinating. Somebody who's, I have a master's of arts in liberal arts, which I sometimes call master of arts, and I won't say it, B period S, you know. But just like artificial intelligence in general, I think is really fascinating. I think from a blockchain perspective, I just think like the throughput and the speed of transactions. You know, I think the Visa has a throughput can do like 70,000 transactions per second. I think NASDAQ is the highest in terms of 100,000 transactions per second. There are blockchains out there that can do more. Now, can they do it, you know, safely, securely, without going down? That's an issue. But I think that is going to, you know, we're going to see that take off, that sort of innovation, and I'm excited about that. Yeah, really excited about that.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah.
We might maybe before we break here. I think we've taken a lot. I haven't done a time check, but I think we're probably a little over. Oh, is there?
Okay. Nice.
From Mary, what are the concerns around blockchain being used by non-governmental bad actors at home and especially abroad, and how can we address them?
Yeah.
Concerns from non-governmental bad actors, and how can we address them?
Yeah, I mean, this is where, in a way, the technology is agnostic in the sense that all technology can be used for good or bad. And I think this is where it goes back to our conversation about like having good rules of the road in place, making sure the intermediaries that engage with these technologies are following the rules of the road. You know, we all the time, people are like, oh, USDC, Circle's not a decentralized autonomous organization. You guys are like the bad guy. And we're like, just like with AI, like anybody who's driven a car knows that it's like man or woman and machine together is more powerful than machine alone or the person alone. I think same thing with the technology, where it's like when you've got centralization and decentralized technologies together, it's really powerful. But you have to make sure that there are rules to make sure that the centralized entities that are engaging with this, that they are following the rules of the road. Now, you've had obviously a lot of hacks. You've seen probably thousands of headlines of blockchain being used for ill. But I would say even in the most extreme examples like North Korea, I think Lazarus Group it's called, we see those headlines. That's a signal. That's a positive signal. We are able to trace and track the flow of transactions so well that we can get these bad actors. And instead of taking 10, 15, 20 years to determine who stole said money, we're now being able to do it. Even though it's pseudo-anonymous, the transactions, you're able to identify who took the money and where it went. And I think that's an example of like, yes, bad actors are going to use this, but we've got really good financial crime compliance tools in place. Not we as in Circle, but companies external to Circle to really kind of help prevent those bad actors.
Yeah, I think you raise I think it's a super good way to sort of end as well, because there is some significant differences structurally about what's happening today, right? So if you go back to the biotech example, if there's a problem with a drug, who can test that?
Yeah.
You have to have clinical trials. It's expensive to figure out what happened. You're not going to go around, I think there's a problem, let's everybody take a sip and see, or take the pill and see what happens, right? No, you've got no way of independent verification other through some very expensive means. And a lot of blockchain technologies, things that are emerging like zero knowledge proofs, enable anyone with enough technical sophistication, but it requires a computer. And it turns out we have a lot of people who have good coding skills, right? That you're able to say, yeah, I can test to verify a transaction, or I can test to see if I can push the transparency of, did something happen or not happen? And we see that as you have a more vocal and inclusive group of ways of testing validity and finding bad actors. It's not just left up to the police or regulatory or clinicians. It's actually anybody who puts their effort and time in can actually figure it out. And that means that level of transparency, I think, is unique. I've not seen that in other areas.
It's really powerful. And I think in all the examples of these hacks, I don't want to piss off a bunch of cryptographers,
right?
Because if you steal something, there are a bunch of really smart people who built these blockchains who are going to use all of their cryptographic intelligence to chase you down, and they do, and they find them, and it's really impressive when they do. Yeah.
Well, actually, to bring things full circle, there's a pun there, I guess, right? So, there is, as I was thinking, there hasn't been another time where transparency made a difference. Well, journalism actually is a place where anybody can pick up their pen, right? Or anyone can go on Twitter and made a difference, right? And it's essentially the same thing, that anyone can make a difference or verify some transaction, or, and that's that can be that's coming back to Arab Spring and demonstrations, and the world can change, right, in multiple ways as a result. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Jared, for coming out.
Yeah,
We're very pleased for
thank you.
Have you come out. And,
thank you.
It's great.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Terrific. Good. We're going to call it there. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thank you.